I recently did a video on 10 horror remakes that you forgot existed, and as promised, I've decided to do 10 more horror remakes that you forgot existed. So here they are. Silent Night, Deadly Night from 1984 is a cult classic slasher that stirred controversy for its killer Santa premise, focusing on Billy, a traumatized orphan who snaps and goes on a murderous rampage. It's campy, shocking, and filled with 80s slasher charm. The 2012 remake, however, Silent Night, takes a looser approach, keeping the killer Santa idea but making him more of a mysterious, unstoppable force rather than a psychologically broken protagonist. The remake leans into brutal kills and a darker tone with a grittier, more modern feel. While the original thrives on its mix of tragedy and over-the-top horror, the remake is more about sheer brutality and suspense. The 1990 Flatliners had a stylish, eerie atmosphere with a strong cast, including Kiefer Sutherland and Julia Roberts, who delivered intense performances. It explored the psychological and the moral consequences of playing with life and death in a way that felt fresh and haunting. The 2017 remake, while visually sleeker and modernised, failed to capture the same depth. It leaned more on the jump scares, and that made it lose the emotional weight that made the original so gripping. Despite a similar premise, the remake felt unnecessary, lacking the impact and tension that made the first one memorable. 1977's Rabid, directed by David Cronenberg, is a raw and unsettling body horror that explores themes of medical experimentation and the dangers of unchecked science. It follows a woman who, after experimental surgery, develops a strange mutation that turns her into a carrier of a rabies-like infection. The 2019 remake by the Soska sisters stays true to the core concept but expands on it with a more modern take, adding a stronger focus on fashion, vanity, and identity. While Cronenberg's film is stark and it's clinical in its horror, the remake leans into surrealism and psychological horror, making it visually striking but more stylized version of the story. The original Castle Freak from 1995, directed by Stuart Gordon, is a cult classic horror film known for its atmospheric tension and its practical effects. Set in a gothic castle, it evolves around a disfigured man locked away by his family, who unleashes havoc upon their return. The film blends psychological horror with physical grotesquerie, focusing on the dynamics of guilt and redemption within the family. On the other hand, the remake, Castle Freak from 2020, is a more modern reimagining that updates the story with a fresh narrative approach and contemporary horror techniques. While still set in an eerie castle, this version delves deeper into the psychological trauma of its characters, exploring themes of isolation and inherited darkness. It combines visceral scares with a nuanced exploration of its protagonist's psyche, offering a more introspective take on the original concept. The Slumber Party Massacre from 1982 is a classic slasher film that follows the formula of the era: teen girls being stalked and murdered by a deranged killer with a powerful drill. It plays straight as a horror film, but it subtly makes fun of the genre tropes, as it was written by a feminist screenwriter, Rita Mae Brown. The 2021 remake, however, leans fully into the self-aware horror comedy, flipping the expectations with gender role reversals and meta-commentary on the slasher genre. While the original focuses on tension and gore, the remake deconstructs cliches, offering a fresh, modern take, while still paying homage to its predecessor, but in a more obvious, less professional way. The 1985 Day of the Dead, directed by George A. Romero, is a grim and atmospheric sequel in his Living Dead series, focusing on a group of scientists and soldiers clashing in an underground bunker as the zombie apocalypse worsens. It explores themes of human nature, control, and the potential for zombies to evolve. The 2007 Day of the Dead, a loose remake, takes a more action-oriented approach, featuring fast-moving zombies, a government quarantine, and a virus-like outbreak. While the original emphasised tension and social commentary, the remake leans into more modern horror tropes with a faster pace and a different interpretation of the undead. Day of the Dead Bloodline from 2018 is another loose reimagining of George A. Romero's Day of the Dead from 1985, but with significant differences. While the original film is tense, a character-driven story set in an underground bunker, exploring exploring the themes of military control and the scientific ethics in a zombie apocalypse, Bloodline shifts focus to a more action-orientated narrative with a personal revenge subplot. The 2018 version introduces a new antagonist, a half-zombie with memories of his past, who fixates on the protagonist, altering the original's philosophical undertones in favour of a more horror thriller approach. The 2014 film Stage Fright is a horror comedy musical that blends slasher elements with dark humour set in a theatre camp, whereas the original Stage Fright from 1987 is a gory Italian slasher film focusing on a troupe of actors trapped with a mass killer. While the 2014 version adds a satirical and musical twist to the horror formula, the 1987 film is a straight-up suspenseful slasher film with brutal kills. Interestingly, the remake shares its name with Alfred Hitchcock's Stage Fright from 1950, though it has no connection to the classic thriller. Mirrors from 2008 is a Hollywood remake of the South Korean horror film Into the Mirrors from 2003. While both films revolve around supernatural occurrences linked to mirrors, the 2008 version takes a more action-driven, psychological horror approach with a darker, more intense atmosphere. The original focuses on a subtle, mystery-driven narrative involving a former detective uncovering eerie secrets behind the department store's mirrors. In contrast, the remake starring Kiefer Sutherland amplifies the horror elements with gruesome imagery and a more elaborate backstory involving a cursed mirror and a sinister alternate dimension. Finally, The Hitcher from 2007, the remake of The Hitcher from 1986, follows the same core story, but it makes key changes in tone, character focus and style. While the original is a psychological thriller with a slow burning tension and a surreal, almost dreamlike quality, the remake leans into fast-paced action and graphic violence, catering to a more modern horror audience. One major shift is the protagonist dynamic, whereas in the 1986 film centres on a lone male driver, the remake follows a couple, altering the tension and stakes. Additionally though, Rutger Hauer's chillingly enigmatic villain in the original is replaced by Sean Bean's more aggressively sadistic portrayal, making the antagonist's menace feel more overt rather than unsettlingly mysterious. So that is 10 more horror remakes that you forgot existed. At least I think maybe you forgot existed. But if you remember those, then leave those comments down below. But also, like I mentioned in the other video, if there is any other horror remakes that you believe that people have forgotten existed, then leave that list down below. There might be films that I don't really include, like, I'm not even going to give you an example, but there might be some that have been remade that nobody knows about because no studio has ever picked it up. Those films don't really count. It has to be a film where a studio has picked up and had a release of some sort. Those are the ones that I'm looking for. But if you believe you know any horror remakes in that category, leave that list down below, guys. And as always, thanks a lot for watching. Thanks for subscribing, and I'll see you soon.
Meeting adjourned.
I'll be right back.
What are you waiting for, huh?
Coming to get you, Barbara.
Ever played Skin the Cat?
Someone's in the